please.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for the introduction. My talk will be relatively short, and I don't anticipate that I will detain you till 5 o'clock. But I want to talk about an important meeting and explain the political nature, if you like, of this meeting, because it is really an ongoing process, and that is the involvement in the Council of Europe in making recommendations in haemophilia care. I'm going to talk about a meeting which was held in April of this year in Germany, and this is the third in a series of meetings following on from 1999 and a decade later in 2009. The hosting organisations were the European Directorate for the Quality of Medicines and Healthcare, so that's the EDQM, which is part of the Council of Europe. And the Ludwig Maximilian University in Germany, really one of the driving forces for this whole initiative is Professor Wolfgang Schramm, who sadly can't be with us today. He's had problems with his hip, but he has a very long-standing link with Romania. He's had very successful twinning links, and he was really the prime force behind this meeting. And then finally, the input from the regulators in the form of the Paul-Ehrlich Institute just outside Frankfurt was also pivotal. So these are the three organisations that held this meeting. The first, just to give you a historical background, was in 1999, which led to a very widely publicised booklet on optimal use of blood products. And the second meeting in 2009 was also followed by a publication in a journal, which I've cited there, and you can read it for your further information. This is the setting. It's actually a wonderful conference centre which is in the middle of nowhere, so there is no escape. If you go to this, it's great to organise a meeting. I think it's very sensible. A small group of people are held together and there's no way out. You can't, like the Intercontinental, go out and do a bit of shopping or go and visit one of the interesting museums. You are there and there is no escape. And indeed, this was where the meeting was held. It's a closed meeting with invited clinicians. Professor Mike Macris was there as well. And companies also attended for part of the meeting. In the past, the focus has been not just on coagulation factor concentrates, but also immunoglobulins, and that was the case this year, although in previous meetings, the meeting extended also to optimal use of other blood derivatives, including blood itself, as well as albumin. And the format was to come up with a programme of lectures followed by working group meetings. And in fact, the conclusions, which you'll see in my final 3 slides, were decided at a meeting in September, so last month in Frankfurt. Now, it is very important that you understand the politics of this, because the EDQM is an important directorate of the Council of Europe. And I think many people get confused about what is the Council of Europe. Now, the Council of Europe was actually founded in 1949. It was actually founded, surprisingly, in London. I can't say that the United Kingdom has been a great supporter of the European Union, but nevertheless, the Council of Europe was founded by the Treaty of London in 1949, although its headquarters are in Strasbourg. It's a much larger organisation than the EU. The EU, now that Croatia has joined, encompasses 28 countries. The Council of Europe is a much larger organisation, as you'll see in the map that I'm going to show you. For a start, it includes large countries such as Russia, and it includes Turkey, for instance. So it's a much larger political bloc. And furthermore, additional states have observer status, as I've listed here. Taking from the website, what is the purpose of the Council of Europe? It's an international organisation promoting cooperation between all countries of Europe in the geographical sense, in the areas of legal standards, human rights, democratic development, rule of law, and cultural cooperation. Here is the map, and you'll see in dark blue the countries of the Council of Europe. So it is a huge territory, larger than the European Union. And the Council of Europe is the body that basically ultimately sanctions and endorses the recommendations that come out of the Wildbad-Kreuth meeting. The one thing, though, that unlike the EU, the Council of Europe cannot make binding legislation, so laws can't come out of meetings supported by the Council of Europe, but of course they are hugely relevant, and they're hugely persuasive. And in fact, there is some overlap between the EU and the Council of Europe in that the Committee of Ministers is formed by the foreign ministers of all member states. And the EDQM does a number of things in the field of medicine, which I've highlighted here. One of the things it does is maintain the European pharmacopoeia, which many of you will be familiar with. So with that in mind, I'll just briefly tell you something about the meeting. The meeting was an invited meeting, and various speakers gave talks, including Mike Macris and including myself, and just to show you the program very briefly. And then this was then followed by closed discussions. For the coagulation factors, the leaders of the discussions were Wolfgang Schramm and Professor Mannucci from Milan, and I was the rapporteur for that group. I won't, these slides that I'm showing you will appear on the website of the EHC, so I won't go through the points I made, other than to show this single slide, emphasizing that I think in Europe we are lucky in that we've got several major pharmaceutical companies and production facilities based here. We emphasize the strong professional and scientific interest in haemophilia, and the strength of patient organizations such as EHC, as well as professional organizations such as EHAD. And I also, in my talk, reiterated an important point about haemophilia care in Europe, and taking this publication, which we published earlier this year, to emphasize that even in Europe, there is a huge diversity in usage of factor. And this is of relevance to one of the key recommendations that came out of the Wildbad-Creuth meeting, which, as you'll see, relates to per capita consumption of factor VIII. The reality is that many countries in Europe, and certainly within the territory of the Council of Europe, use very modest, very small quantities of factor VIII. For instance, here in Romania, we can say that the per capita consumption is just 0.5 units per capita compared to, say, Hungary, where it's 3.4. So remember that figure. So again, I won't dwell on this. Let me get straight then to the principal recommendations that came out of the meeting, and there are just 3 slides. So these are the recommendations that come out of the meeting, that were finalized at the meeting in Frankfurt last month, that have been endorsed by the Council of Europe, and therefore EDQM. And the first is exactly what it says: in order to optimize the organization of haemophilia care nationally, it is recommended that a formal body be established in each country to include the relevant clinicians, national haemophilia patient organization, health ministry, paying authority, and, if appropriate, regulatory authority. So each country should have a national body which is devoted to establishing haemophilia care. And actually this morning we had with the EHC and WFH representatives, a press conference with media from here in Romania. This is something we are hoping to get signed by the Minister of Health during this meeting for Romania. In the general discussions, I'd also want to add that there was strong support for a project that Professor Macris has led on, which is the UHARNet project relating to certification of haemophilia centres, and our group felt that in due course there should be a system of peer review of haemophilia centres in the longer term. Now, building on previous meetings, the important recommendation that comes out is the minimum factor VIII consumption level in a country should be 3 units per capita. To give you an example, Sweden is just over 8 units per capita. We in the United Kingdom are at 7 international units per capita. I'll remind you that I mentioned that in Romania the current consumption is just 0.5. That isn't an adequate figure, and we have to push for higher usage, not just in Romania, but of course those other countries within the territory of the Council of Europe where that level is low. It was pointed out by many speakers from many countries in this meeting that you cannot offer or guarantee access to prophylaxis in children if you have a lower consumption than 3 units per capita. Related to factor consumption was also a statement, a very important statement. The decision on whether to adopt a new product shouldn't be based solely on cost. What matters is quality of the product, and it is important that it isn't just a question of cost. We recognize this is a potential problem with national tenders. And in related issues that came out in the discussion related to this particular issue is that we're all excited by long-acting products, and I'll be talking about those in a session tomorrow. The concern is that these may not be affordable in due course. And the meeting felt very strongly that it isn't all about moving everybody to recombinant products. We recognize that both plasma-derived and recombinant products will be needed for years to come. And this is really moving on from this. Prophylaxis for children with severe haemophilia is already recognized as the optimum therapy. We want to make a clear statement that prophylaxis for adults should also be on the menu. I'm not saying it should be routine as it is for adults, but the option of prophylaxis in adults should be available if the patient feels that very strongly. Related to prophylaxis, we consider the specific topic of inhibitors. You'll be very well aware that in most cases we can get rid of inhibitors with immune tolerance therapy, but unfortunately some children will fail to respond to immune tolerance, or they are, for one reason or another, not suitable. We know from published studies that bypassing agents such as FIBA or Novo-7 can reduce the number of bleeds in patients with inhibitors if used on a prophylactic basis. And the meeting felt very strongly that children with inhibitors who failed immune tolerance should be offered prophylaxis with bypassing agents. Although I would note in the same breath that there was less enthusiasm for prophylaxis in adults with inhibitors for two reasons. Firstly, because these are likely to have established joint damage already, but also the notably higher cost. And then in the final slide, we also strongly felt that single-factor concentrates should be used as therapy wherever possible in patients with rare bleeding disorders. We recognize that a number of new agents are being developed, and I'm pleased to say many of these are being developed by companies actually within Europe as opposed to across the ocean in North America. So we've got new concentrates of fibrinogen as well as factor 5 and factor 10 for a start, and we endorse the use of single-factor concentrates wherever possible. Orphan drug designation is a whole subject in itself, and indeed I joined a group on behalf of the European Haemophilia Consortium meeting up with the European Medicines Agency back in June in London to address this specific issue. But orphan drug designation, we felt, shouldn't be used to hinder the development, licensing and marketing of other products for the same condition. There was some concern that the companies who manufacture products can, theoretically at least, exploit legislation and seek protected status for a product under development in order to secure market exclusivity. So those were the recommendations that came out of the 2003 Wildbad-Creuth initiative. I wanted to explain the wider process to you and the importance of the involvement of the Council of Europe, because I believe that this series of meetings will be ongoing, hopefully with the support and participation of Professor Wolfgang Schramm in coming years. And I think it's important as a European organization, even countries not formally in the EU right now, that we stand together behind this group recommendations, but also take advantage of these recommendations when we lobby politicians for change. And with that, I'm going to finish slightly ahead of time. Thank you very much.